Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. My name is Jason, and today I want to go ahead and issue a retraction. So, I said when I was talking about the Iran war that I had had some thoughts come to me, and there were a lot of thoughts that had come to me that were ones that felt inspired, like I was on the right track, and I still think they were. But there was one thought that was a pre existing thought from a previous Venezuela situation that didn't apply so much here. So, that was the big difference. Is I spoke on that too, and I added that into the conversation. Is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, crimes against the laws of nations or offenses against the laws of nations. Um, there are no laws. There kind of is one, but I wouldn't call it constitutionally sound at all. From the 70s, Nixon tried to veto it, and it got passed anyhow, I think is the way I understand it. But anyhow, there were no laws passed exercising that power that had anything to do with the Iran situation that we're in currently. The main inspiration that I felt, and I've brought up the going back to the land of Nephi thing again with Zena, which is one that I've felt is an important one to pay attention to, but maybe just a principle. But the real inspiration I felt was Alma and Amulek, when they allowed for, I think it was the Zoramites, if I'm not mistaken. I think, I'm not for sure. Please don't quote me on that. To go ahead and kill a bunch of their believers in Jesus Christ and burn a bunch of books right there in front of them. And Amulek says, why don't we just stop them? Why don't we just exercise the power of God? And Alma says, the Spirit constraineth me because they need to be allowed to do this. The people that are getting killed are being received up into heaven for their righteous desires. And when God does exercise vengeance on these killers, they will have proven where their hearts are, and their judgment will be just. So I still stand by that, but there were no laws that had anything to do with Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10. So that was a misrepresentation on my part. But yeah, I think like I compared the concept of what happened in Cuba versus what happened in Iran. There was protests during the Biden administration. Cubans were trying to get America to help free them, and then Cubans were wanting to cross the border too. I remember that, and getting turned back by a Cuban. What was his name? Mayorkas. Uh, so the border was wide open for everyone except for Cubans who love freedom so much, and America didn't stand up and help them. But the big deal is that Cuba wasn't shooting their own people in the streets for protesting. They were just capturing them and subduing them. Versus Iran, apparently, what we had recently. There's plenty of accounts, apparently, that they were straight up killing their people. So I would say they've earned their justice. I've re-listened to old interviews with Nixon, as a matter of fact. Very interesting, the transition between the Shah and Khomeini. This is an ongoing number one state sponsor of terror, basically. And then to top it off, uh, I've had friends, I shouldn't say friends, clients. I teach classical guitar lessons and rock groups and other things, piano, drums, what have you. And so my brain's used to processing a lot of information. I always say when I look at the Constitution, I'd memorize 10 times as much sheet music as this per year easily, right? Of very advanced sheet music. That was normal life for me during my college years. So it's not like it's hard for me to process the Constitution and cross-reference it. That's pretty normal for us to have that skill set. But these clients from Iran, I asked him, about his history a little bit. He grew up in Sweden, and my grandpa was Swedish, and so we would chat about that. And he said basically a lot of people, when Khomeini took over, just crossed Europe, got on horseback, whatever, crossed the desert, whatever they could, to go live in some place like Sweden. So there's a good population of those kind of people there, if I'm not mistaken. So let's talk about, though, why I think it's still constitutional, most likely what President Trump is doing, as long as he doesn't turn it into something like Vietnam again. Vietnam should have had a declaration of war. I think Korea should have had a declaration of war. These long, drawn-out fights, they should have a declaration of war. But what Trump was doing there um, was this is a legitimate enemy. And when I say our friends are going over to our neighbor's house or to Israel's house, right, to hang out, our kids are going over there and hanging out. In other words, there's a lot of Christians in America, and that's what we call the Holy Land. So yes, there's always a lot of Americans going over there. It seems, not that I've ever been able to, but my in-laws have, which is pretty cool. And so yeah, it kind of matters, you know. Israel's kind of a special place to us, right? And Iran's such a dangerous place. And we've got this whole constitution. So let's talk about the constitutionality and where I think your strongest constitutionality argument is. Uh, let's talk about defending our divinely inspired constitution real quick. President Oaks talks about the ebbs and flows, one branch wanting to impede the powers that are granted to another branch, and this branch wanting to impede those powers. He didn't actually talk about usurpations if you pay attention to him, which is interesting because founders were obsessed with usurpations. But the impeding, okay? And if you listen to an old talk back in the days when L. Tom Perry was speaking at BYU, Truth and Liberty was his talk, and Dallin H. Oaks was speaking at BYU. What is it called? There's another one on principles of government, constitutions and stuff. Great one. Dang it, I usually can say this off the top of my head. Great talk. Totally go look it up. It's excellent principles taught there. One of the big deals when the founders came up with the Constitution versus the Articles of Confederation was that the Articles of Confederation had been so ineffective. One of the main reasons they didn't have a single unitary chief executive. They also didn't have a judicial branch, but the judicial branch that they created, even with the Constitution, was intended to be the weakest branch by far. It have no proactive powers whatsoever. Well, the executive was intended to have actual proactive powers. So he's got this take care clause. Plus, he's got the ability to initiate treaties, what have you. That's proactive right there. But the take care clause says, he shall take care that the laws of the land are faithfully executed, right? And then you've got the supremacy clause, Article 6, Clause 2, which says that the Constitution itself is a law. It's the supreme law of the land, and then also the laws passed through the Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process, and then the treaties, which go through the Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 process, right? And in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, that's where it establishes, this is a plenary existing power, is that as long as there's an existing Army and Navy, the President's just always Commander-in-Chief of them, right? The militia, it's only when they're called into duty, right? I called into actual service, but he's always the commander-in-chief of them. And he's got this take care clause, make sure the laws are faithfully executed. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. L. Tom Perry said the most important part of the Constitution is the preamble, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of people found it that way. Thomas Jefferson, if I'm not mistaken. And the preamble says, to provide for common defense, right? Common defense right there. So if you've got a threatening situation and the president's supposed to be making sure that whatever the Constitution promises is getting done one way or another, right? To make him wait for Congress to declare war, which, by the way, learn to read the verbs. Okay, so I'll tell a story real quick here. We've got this primary chorister who, with her little, she's awesome, by the way, super talented, with her little kind of flashcards to help people learn the words to the songs, but they don't have all the words written in. And I'm sitting there reading off of the actual song, and it's pretty common for me to be reading what the actual words are and say 5 or 6 words throughout a verse or throughout all the verses that are different from the words she's saying, because she's saying them off the top of her head. And verbs matter. I figured that out when I was on my mission. I was one of the first people to memorize all the Constitution, the discussions, by the way, because again, these are things that come easy to musicians, you guys. Memorization comes easy to us. Analyzing traditions, all that kind of stuff of interpretation, that is just normal for us. Okay, so anyhow, the wording of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 was originally make war. This is congressional powers granted. They shall have the power to make war. Apparently, according to the notes kept by James Madison, I think I'm saying that right, it was according to his notes, but anyhow, he recommended the change. He says, no, that's not going to give us That's not going to solve our problem. We need a more powerful government because the articles were so ineffective. He says, let's change it to declare war. In other words, the president has this take care clause. He's the commander in chief, period. Though he has those, no matter what's passed through the bill writing process in Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2, no matter what's passed through that, right? He's got this duty. The Constitution was the supreme law of the land, right? This take care clause to it, the commander in chief of the military, which then the Constitution says is going to provide for common defense, right? So, to me, and then we've been told by Ezra Taft Benson, specifically, go look at the talk Jesus Christ, Gifts and Expectations, which is an amazing talk for like so many other reasons besides this one. But he says, President McKay told us to study the Constitution according to the tradition of the founders and according to the words of the prophets. And the tradition of the founders is this. The tradition of the founders, and I've already cited some prophets here. The tradition of the founders, L. Tom Perry, he really emphasizes the need for the effective government, by the way. Go listen to that talk, Truth and Liberty. The tradition of the founders, the first 5 presidents, if you ask me, that's the closest thing you're going to get. Dallin H. Oaks recently talked about the mantle, right? Who else can we say has the mantle of representing the tradition of the founders, except for the president, who's been elected by literally all the states, the compilation, the total count of the Electoral College representing all 13 states, right? It's the president. First 5 presidents were the founding presidents: Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. I find them to be very significant to study. And I personally think we're supposed to focus on Jefferson the most. It was the Declaration of Independence signers that were allowed to show up to the St. George Temple. Jefferson went against the Barbary pirates without waiting for Congress. He just did. He went to them afterwards. Monroe did something similar, I think in Florida. Washington had some similar-ish stuff. Adams had some similar stuff. They were pretty careful. I don't want to misrepresent this either. The division of powers is important. The president should not be getting in some long, protracted war without a declaration of war, right? But when you've got a threatening posture from an enemy, prove to me, please, anybody who wants to, prove to me that the single unitary chief executive was not put there because we didn't trust some long drawn-out process. I mean, there was already a Congress with the Articles of Confederation. Clearly, that was ineffective at getting the job done. If all we're reliant on is Congress. And another thing, I think President Trump's right, which is concerning. He says Congress has leaks. That stinks, man. But I think he's probably right. I'm going to reference January 6th, 2020, where the president, I should say 2021, where members of the Senate and the House were saying they felt like the integrity of the vote needed to be investigated, and they were just asking for some time. Then a little riot starts with feds in the crowd and all this stuff. And I don't know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but something's very suspicious there anyhow. And besides, if you're principled, if you really believe that those electoral counts need to be investigated, that should not break your spirit. That's pretty wimpy. I'm sorry, dude. That's not George Washington-ish at all. That's, I don't know what, man. If they really believed that those electoral counts needed to be investigated. So I can't help but be suspicious. How brave is Congress? How true to America is Congress? We saw recently where the president was speaking, and yes, I know it was a trap he gave them, but it was representative of truth, honestly. Let's be honest. He asked, okay, stand up if you believe it's more important to defend Americans than it is to defend illegal immigrants, right? It's kind of an obvious one. Read the preamble. Most important part of the Constitution, apparently, right? So, half that group didn't stand up. Why would you go to them and ask them for a declaration of war? Which is really sad. I think Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor, plus we've been told to look at 3rd Nephi, at the Book of Mormon, as though it teaches us stuff, which then reminds me of 3rd Nephi 7. But we're supposed to apply the Book of Mormon to our day. We might be headed a bad way with that level of division. That's pretty serious stuff. I don't think there was ever a time in America where people wouldn't have stood up for something like that, So I think President Trump's probably justified. I mean, it sounds like Khomeini was. Well, he proved his point. I think I'm going to come back to that Alma and Abielek thing. He earned his judgment. You might not like Trump. I'm not a total MAGA guy, right? I'm a Constitution guy. Religiously, that's what I am. I'm a whatsoever, more or less guy. This channel is called what it is for a reason. It has the 3 pictures for a reason. Constitution itself, 5 founding presidents, and Jesus Christ, in other words, or his representatives, whether by my own voice or by the voice of my servants, is the same. In other words, the leaders, the prophets of the latter days, right? That's who I turn to understand it. And I mess up. I even said so in that video when I was talking on Iran that I thought I might mess up in what I was saying. And sure enough, I was looking at it like, wait a second, there is no law passed through the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10 powers that was relevant to what President Trump did recently. So the only defense for it, because I did feel like the impression that I needed to consider the Alma and Abielek thing, the only defense for it is that take care clause and the fact that the Constitution itself is a law. It's the supreme law of the land, and that the preamble says the Constitution was established for a more perfect union and common defense, which the more perfect union is impossible to create without a single unitary chief executive. And the president is the commander-in-chief. You can't take that away from him. That's the only way to take that away from him is through the Article 5 process, which wouldn't be wise in the first place. You might as well just redo the whole Constitution at that point, which don't do it. Don't do it. If anything, we just need to start following the Constitution again. So don't interfere with the president's ability to defend us. I realize there's ebbs and flows. I have seen President Trump canceling more of the executive branch, it seems, than adding to it. I could be wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. Please do. Please. But, with that whole Elon Musk thing in the Department of Government Efficiency, I think he was reducing the executive branch. I don't know, though. He could be grabbing powers for himself and interfering with the other branches. I think the courts interfere the most. The courts right now, anything that's going on, the enforcement of immigration, that's a plenary power of the federal government. It should be allowed to be executed and carried out, right? In other words, and for the courts to stop it, that's an ebbs and flows problem right there, referring to Dallin H. Oaks defending our divinely inspired Constitution. Anyhow, and then, we've got the whole administrative state thing, but that's, again, president's trying to do away with it. Courts are blocking some of that too, if I'm not mistaken. Again, that's an ebbs and flows problem right there. So I guess I am kind of a fan of President Trump, if I'm being honest. I really am. He makes me uncomfortable sometimes. I'm finding that the libertarians, I still believe they're a little bit more constitutionally accurate than others, but I think too they're a little bit too anti-government. And that doesn't comport with what Elton Perry taught us in the Talk Truth and Liberty. So keep government to its proper role. That's what Ezra Taft Benson said. He did declare himself a libertarian, by the way, if you read the Red Carpet book. But anyhow, yeah, I apologize for getting that wrong about Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10. And there are no laws that were relevant in the Iran thing. It was just purely finally dealing with an enemy, it just sounds like. So, and probably a distrust of Congress, and also Israel probably initiating it. And again, it definitely is relevant to common defense, since there's so many Christians in America that see that as the Holy Land and spend so much time over there. It's like Americans always get caught up in that stuff. Always. So, from what I can tell anyhow, who am I to say always, maybe, though, right? So anyhow, thanks again for listening, you guys. Read the Constitution. Get good at cross-referencing it. I can't go and read all those bills. Shoot, those things are 500 pages long, which is ridiculous a lot of times, but I can read the Constitution and cross-reference it and have some good ideas. So, all right, guys, I see you.